Yeah, no problem. So this is Steve Cross, and he'll be talking about lessons learned from using vertical slice architecture.
How are we looking? Can you see a slide?
Yep, we can see it all good.
Oh, just up. Hi, my name's Steve Cross. I'm a consultant with Telstra Purple. So over the last year or so, I've been working in and out of a team that introduced vertical slice architecture into an API that they've been delivering. I just kind of wanted to share a few of the lessons learned over that time because it was new to me, and I hadn't come across too many other people that had been using vertical slice architecture. So today I was hoping to kind of come across basically what vertical slice architecture is, the approach that the team took in delivering the API with vertical slice, and some of the lessons learned. So what worked well, what did not work as well, and a few closing thoughts on my experiences with vertical slice architecture. So I guess every story has a beginning. Why do we go down this path? We were initially engaged with a client to come into a team that was going to be building out an API. The team had an architect. Now, the architect had a couple of mission statements he needed to achieve. He needed to make sure that the API could be scaled to have quite a large number of developers working on it. That's not normally a particularly good thing to do, but I'll leave that there for now and touch on that in maybe another talk. So we had an aggressive timeline. We needed the code base to scale with multiple developers. And so we really needed to reduce the number of code conflicts and merge conflicts that we'd have. The front-end team that we were going to be working with as well had also structured their application vertically, and we're seeing quite a lot of success. So what is vertical slice architecture? A lot of people are probably very familiar with the end-tier approach and probably are working in or have worked in applications that are structured like this. A lot of people's similar code is grouped into projects of the same type. So all of your services live in your services projects and repository and so on and so forth. But with vertical slices, all of your code actually lives in that vertical slice, in that particular feature, so that you don't call across to other verticals to complete the request, and you don't have this separation of concepts. One of the things with end-tier applications is a lot of the time you're forced into adhering to abstraction concepts, which one of the things that was nice about moving into vertical slices. So how do we kick off? We gathered the team together to talk about how we wanted to structure the API vertically. We also talked about, like, did the team even want to deliver a vertical slice API? It was new to everyone in the team. I'd actually seen Jimmy Bogart's talk at NDC pretty much about 2 or 3 weeks earlier. So I was quite interested in obviously trying to pick up something I just had seen a talk on. But we decided to kind of group the features or the verticals basically by HTTP verbs. So rather than kind of grouping the whole feature and having like one large controller with the get, post, and so on and so forth, we actually split it down into, sorry, I went ahead too fast. We decided to split it down into actual HTTP verbs. At that point in time, we kind of had a few assumptions. The code base was going to be quite lightweight. Most of our business logic was actually in a separate library that we would reference. And we kind of assumed that most of the features would follow a similar kind of pattern to one another. So we should be able to kind of set a pattern once and then be able to achieve that across all of the other verticals. The code base did exist at this particular point in time. So one of our first tasks was go in and refactor the project, the solution. So we did have all of the standard kind of separate project files and so on and so forth. So it was quite an early product at this point. So I wouldn't recommend doing that in a more established product. The way that we structured the API, we used the late Scott Allen's add features folder. It was pretty much as simple as the lines of code that I hope you can see. Add features folder after MVC. It's a .NET 2.1 application, so we haven't migrated it to 3.1 yet. MVC is no longer a dependency, so I believe it should still work. But the features folder was our entry point. So we structured everything, say this isn't actually the domain, just an example. So our courses, and then all of the code that we needed to serve the get requests or the post requests were in one place. I'll touch on the shared folders slightly in a minute. So one of the things I've kind of spoken about, we're moving away from end tier into verticals. Is there still a place for domain driven design? Like definitely. A lot of the onion diagram over to the right was kind of goes away slightly, I suppose, but like the core premise, you're modeling your domain is still very important. And also we have a lot of non-technical people that are involved in the project. So we need to communicate, and ubiquitous language is still incredibly integral. So I just wanted to kind of call out that vertical slice architecture and domain-driven design, but they're not mutually exclusive. So what worked well? One or two things I needed to adjust myself to were some of the kind of guiding principles I'd already adhered to. I needed to kind of move away from. So originally, I'd always liked the dry approach, do not repeat yourself, rather than the new aptly term kind of wet, write everything twice. But it actually turned out that we needed to write everything twice so that we would stop coupling our vertical slices together. This is a lot slower initially, but as we found that, like when we tried to implement new features and extend the functionality, it was a lot faster because we knew that we were just changing things in one place. We kind of adopted like the Yagni, you ain't gonna need it approach. So we reduced a lot of complexity, and we found that onboarding new people was faster. And at the times when we introduced new quote feature unquote or bug, as the QA team would say, investigation was a lot faster because we could actually narrow down a lot quicker the code that was causing the problem. It wasn't distributed across different projects. We do still share code. We try to keep it as minimal as possible. We had a couple of like safety nets in place, which I'll come across in a bit. You really want to keep the scope of the shared code as small as possible. Otherwise, you start coupling your verticals, and then you end up with a few problems that I'll talk about in a bit. So you kind of want to know what code is distinct and which things that can be shared. Small business rules that are only ever going to change everywhere are a good example of what to put in your shared area. The other thing that was normally something that's kind of guided me in the past is the testing pyramid. We kind of found that because our API was very much input, process, output, and the fact that all of our business logic was in a separate library and was already heavily tested, we were kind of duplicating a lot of tests. And so we actually found that most of our testing was going to be in that integration level, and a particular type of test that we used, subcontaneous tests, gave us the most amount of confidence that our application was behaving as we intended as we added more code to the code base. So what are subcontaneous tests? Subcontaneous obviously like beneath the skin. So we really wanted to kind of test the feature itself rather than a lot of the additional things that kind of are dependencies. Like we know that we need to authenticate before we can hit the majority of these endpoints, and we know that there's middleware. And we didn't want to test those with every single feature. We wanted to separate those tests out into their own kind of unit tests or their own integration tests. So our subcontaneous test tested from the entry points of the controller down through any kind of service or handler to the database and then back up. And we made sure that we could test our application's flow and our logic that way. Some other points that worked quite well, found that pull requests, because the code was a lot less complex, were more concise and clearer. It was easier for people to contribute because they had more confidence they weren't going to break something else in the application. What didn't work so well, as I was saying, you can end up calling across features. It kind of turned into these kind of pinball requests where one request would call another vertical to get some information, which called another vertical. I guess the equivalent in like a microservices world would be when you kind of have lots of different services talking to each other. It's not where you really want to be, and it coupled everything together and blew away all the benefits of having our vertical slices. We ended up implementing a style cop rule to make sure that people had to be very specific when they wanted to call across namespaces. Other things that we couldn't kind of get around, kind of pointing to issues in the design of our API or potentially the domain. Shared was one of the places we could put code. Turned into a bit of a dumping ground, and it's one of the pain points at the moment in the team because we have to come back and refactor a lot of this out. I think the main reason was there was a lot of time pressure on the project. It really shouldn't have happened, but developers will find a way, even if it's not the correct way. It's always the path of least resistance. More of a side effect of the time pressure rather than vertical slices, but I found that the API took on a slightly less RESTful, more of just a HTTP API structure. I think a lot of that was down to the problem that when you write everything more than once, it obviously takes longer to produce the code. Hopefully that's something that we can kind of come around and find a nice solution for in the future. So a few closing thoughts on vertical slice architecture. I really enjoyed working with it. I found it took away a lot of the complexity of coming into a code base or trying to understand where your changes needed to be. So I definitely would be taking vertical slices forward for any other APIs that I need to be building. A couple of references before I go. Jimmy Bogard does a fantastic talk on vertical slice architecture. That's the link to his talk there. It's the one from NDC. And also, if you're going to be using a .NET application, there's Odecode's add features folder. It saved us a bit of work. So thank you very much for your time. I think back over to our lovely MC.
Cool. I'm like waiting for all the claps to come in now. This is great.